The vastness of space was home to many civilizations, each with its own unique strengths, technologies, and philosophies. The Galactic Concord, a coalition of the most advanced species in the universe, prided itself on its ability to assess and categorize every known race. They had conquered or assimilated countless planets, their fleets moving like unstoppable forces through the void. Then they met humanity. At first, humans were nothing more than another species to classify. They were an anomaly, an upstart civilization that had clawed its way out of its own planet's gravity while using primitive chemical rockets before advancing to fusion-powered vessels. Their ships were not as sleek as the Kalari. They lacked the organic technology of the Var. They did not have the psionic capabilities of the Eldrin. Yet there was something about human warships that disturbed the Concord's analysts. The first encounter was with the hegemony of Trinax, a species known for its meticulous data collection. Their intelligence arm had always boasted of its ability to scan any ship, no matter how well it was shielded. They believed knowledge was power, and so when they encountered the first Terran warship, the TNS Dauntless, they immediately activated their deep space scanners. What they found changed everything. The ship's exterior was standard enough, composed of advanced alloys and shielded against most known forms of attack. But when the scanners attempted to penetrate deeper, they encountered something that had never been seen before. The data coming back was wrong. The readings fluctuated wildly. The ship's core registered as a fusion reactor one moment, an antimatter drive the next. The weapon systems seemed to phase in and out of known classifications, sometimes appearing as railguns, then energy cannons, then something entirely unidentifiable. More disturbingly, certain sections of the ship were black holes of information, as if the scanner's very signals were being devoured. Then, the Trinax scanners shut down entirely. Not just the ones scanning the ship. All of them. Across the hegemony's intelligence networks, deep space sensors went offline. The Trinax researchers monitoring the scan screamed in agony as their implants overloaded. Some suffered immediate neural failure, collapsing at their stations. Others clawed at their own faces, muttering incoherently about the whispers in the code. It took weeks to restore the Trinax systems, and when they did, they issued an unprecedented order. No Trinax vessel, under any circumstances, was to attempt scanning a human warship ever again. The Concord dismissed this as an anomaly, until it happened again. And again. The Solari, a race known for their organic computers and hyper-advanced bioengineering, attempted to decipher what was happening inside a Terran dreadnought. Their scanning tendrils, living organisms themselves, shriveled and died upon contact with the ship's energy signature. The Eldrin, whose psychic abilities could normally read the thoughts of entire planets, sent their most gifted minds to probe a human battlecruiser. They came back shattered, their minds reduced to gibbering wrecks, muttering about the screaming void inside the ship. Even the Dixari, who could predict the future with near-perfect accuracy, found that whenever they attempted to foresee the outcome of a battle involving human warships, their visions turned to static. They saw nothing. Or worse, they saw themselves already dead, long before the first shot was fired. The final straw came when the Galactic Concord's ruling council attempted to force a full-scale analysis. They sent a combined fleet, equipped with the most advanced scanning arrays in existence, to surround a single human battleship, the TNS Harbinger. What happened next was never publicly disclosed. What is known is that none of those ships ever returned. No distress signals, no debris, no explanation, just gone. After that, the Concord made an official decree. No species, no matter how advanced, shall ever attempt to scan a Terran warship again. because whatever was inside those ships was not meant to be understood. The Galactic Concord tried to suppress the growing fear surrounding human warships, but the truth had already begun to spread in whispers and fragmented data logs. Across the universe, scientists, tacticians, and spies speculated about what had gone so horribly wrong for those who had attempted to scan a Terran vessel. Some theorized that humanity had developed a form of quantum encryption so advanced that it scrambled the very perception of those who attempted to decipher it. Others believed the ships were shielded by some form of exotic matter that defied known physics. But the most unsettling theory came from the Eldrin, the most powerful telepaths in the galaxy, who had barely survived their attempt to probe human vessels. They claimed that human warships were not just machines. They were aware. The idea was dismissed by the more scientifically minded members of the Concord, but those who had encountered Terran ships firsthand knew better. There was something about the way they moved, how they responded to threats, how they always seemed to be just one step ahead of their enemies. It was as if the ships themselves were watching, calculating, waiting. One race, the daring and reckless Var, decided they would uncover the truth. Unlike the more cautious species of the Concord, the Var were warriors first and scientists second. Their empire was built on conquest, and they had yet to meet an enemy they could not dominate. They gathered a fleet, one of the largest ever assembled, and launched an assault on a Terran stronghold. At the heart of their target was a single human battleship, the TNS Oblivion. By all logic, the fight should have been an easy one. The Var fleet outnumbered the lone Terran ship 100 to 1. Their weapons were among the most devastating in the galaxy. Their commanders were seasoned veterans who had conquered countless systems. But the moment they engaged, something went terribly wrong. The Oblivion didn't move like a normal warship. It weaved through space with an unnatural fluidity, as though it could see the future, dodging barrages before they were even fired. The Var's targeting systems malfunctioned, locking onto empty space, or, even worse, their own allies. Then came the communications breakdown. The fleet's admirals barked orders, but their voices came back to them twisted, distorted, as if something was speaking through them. Some heard their own voices whispering, "Run." Others heard nothing at all but the deafening silence of the void. And then the screaming started. It didn't come from their enemies. It came from their own crews. Soldiers, pilots, tacticians, entire decks filled with warriors suddenly collapsing, clutching their heads, their eyes rolling back as they convulsed on the floor. No weapons had touched them. No visible force had struck their ships. Yet they were dying all the same, their minds unraveling from something unseen. One captain, before his ship was torn apart by an invisible force, managed to send out a single message to the Var homeworld. His final words were recorded, analyzed, and eventually buried by the Concord. It was just one sentence. "The ship is looking at me." When the battle was over, only the Oblivion remained. There was no wreckage, no debris, just silence. The mighty Var fleet had been erased, as if it had never existed. From that day forward, the Var, once the most feared conquerors in the galaxy, refused to speak of the battle. No records were kept, no survivors were found. The entire event became nothing more than a ghost story, passed in hushed voices among those who still dared to wonder what lay within the heart of a Terran warship. But one truth became undeniable. Even the bravest, the strongest, and the smartest aliens in the universe refused to scan a human warship ever again. The fear surrounding human warships grew, but it was more than just fear. It was a warning etched into the minds of those who had dared to seek answers and suffered for it. Entire civilizations had learned to avert their sensors when encountering a Terran vessel, treating them like cosmic anomalies best left undisturbed. And yet, there was always someone who refused to listen. The Zelnari, an ancient and arrogant species, considered themselves the pinnacle of intelligence. Their race had mastered reality-warping technologies, bending time and space at their will. Their minds functioned on a level so advanced that they viewed most other species as mere children fumbling in the dark. They had no love for the galactic conquered. To them, fear was the symptom of a lesser mind. Where the conquered saw danger, the Zelnari saw opportunity. So when the legends of human warships reached them, they did not hesitate. They had never encountered humans directly, never faced them in war or diplomacy. To them, Terrans were simply a primitive species that had stumbled upon something remarkable, something they had no right to possess. The Zelnari believed that whatever technology powered human warships could be stolen and understood. And so, the Zelnari High Council authorized Project Eclipse. A single, ultra-advanced research vessel was dispatched under the guise of neutrality. It bore no weapons, only the most powerful scanning equipment ever devised, capable of breaking through any defense, any deception. It could peer into the fabric of reality itself, uncovering the most hidden of truths. Their target? The TNS Eclipse, a Terran dreadnought patrolling the outskirts of human-controlled space. The Zelnari ship kept its distance, careful not to provoke a response. It did not engage in combat. It did not transmit a signal. It simply observed. At first, all seemed well. Their instruments captured normal readings, hull composition, heat signatures, gravitational distortions. But when they activated their deep-core scanners, something unexpected happened. The Eclipse turned. Not in an evasive maneuver, not to change course. It turned to face them. There was no possible way the human crew could have known they were being scanned. The Zelnari technology was undetectable, existing outside the normal dimensions of perception. And yet, the moment their scanners activated, the ship looked directly at them. A silence fell over the research team. Every Zelnari aboard felt something primal, an instinct they had not experienced in thousands of years. Dread. The lead scientist, a being who had mapped the very veins of time itself, hesitated. He did not understand why, but he could not bring himself to continue. His fingers hovered over the controls, paralyzed by something he could not name. Then the ship's systems began to fail. One by one, their instruments flickered and died. Their scanners, their shields, even their life support. All of it went dark. Panic spread across the crew as they scrambled to diagnose the failure, but there was no malfunction, no attack. Something was inside their ship, not a physical entity, not a cybernetic intrusion. Something was watching them. The lead scientist gasped as his vision blurred. He was no longer in his lab, no longer aboard his own ship. He was somewhere else. He stood in an infinite void, surrounded by whispers that had no source. Shapes shifted in the darkness, eyes forming and unforming, gazing upon him with something that was not curiosity, but judgment. The whispers turned to voices. He understood none of the words, but the meaning pierced his mind. "Do not look." The scientist screamed, collapsing as his consciousness snapped back into his body. He was lying on the cold metal floor of the Zelnari research vessel, gasping for breath. Around him, his crew was motionless, unmoving, dead. Their eyes were open, their mouths locked in silent screams. The Eclipse did nothing. It did not fire a single shot. It merely turned away, as if disinterested. By the time the Zelnari ship was discovered, drifting lifelessly in space, no one was left alive to explain what had happened. The data logs were corrupted beyond repair. The Zelnari High Council attempted to cover up the disaster, erasing all records of Project Eclipse. But whispers spread. Rumors, fears. Even among the most arrogant race in the galaxy, the message was clear. Do not scan human warships. Because some knowledge was never meant to be known. The incident with the Zelnari sent shockwaves through the galactic Concord. If even they, beings who had mastered space, time, and the very essence of knowledge, could not comprehend what lay inside a human warship, then perhaps the truth was never meant to be uncovered. Fear turned to silence. Silence turned to avoidance. For decades, no species dared to scan a Terran vessel. Encounters with the Terran Navy were brief, often ending with alien ships altering their course without a word. The Concord, once determined to classify every race in the galaxy, quietly removed humanity from their records. But some still sought answers. The Drellic were a species of archivists, historians, and seekers of lost knowledge. Unlike the Concord's conquerors, the Drellic did not desire war or control. They simply wished to understand. To them, the mystery of humanity was the most enticing puzzle in the universe. And so one final attempt was made. A single Drellic scout ship, the Seeker's Gift, was sent to shadow a Terran fleet. They did not intend to scan the ships directly, only to record their movements, analyze their energy output, and decipher any patterns that could explain what had driven so many others to madness. For weeks, they followed in secret. The human fleet did not acknowledge them, did not show any sign of aggression. It was as if they did not care about the tiny, insignificant ship watching from the shadows. Then one day, without warning, the Terran flagship, TNS Omen, came to a dead stop. The rest of the fleet continued its course, but the Omen remained motionless, watching. The Drellic crew hesitated. They had not scanned the ship. They had done nothing to provoke a response. So why did it feel like the Omen had suddenly noticed them? Aboard the Seeker's Gift, an uneasy tension filled the air. The ship's captain, a veteran explorer named Kethril, debated whether they should turn back. The mission had been successful. Recording human fleet movements was an achievement in itself, but curiosity had been the driving force of Drellic evolution. And so, against his better judgment, Kethril issued the order. One scan. Passive only, just enough to understand why it stopped. The order was carried out. The ship's sensors reached out, gently, carefully, as if trying not to disturb something sleeping. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then every screen on the Seeker's Gift went dark. The ship shook violently, as if something had grabbed it. Instruments exploded in bursts of fire and static. The crew screamed as the ship's artificial gravity inverted, sending bodies crashing into the ceiling. And then, the voices began. Not through the ship's speakers, inside their minds. They were not words. They were thoughts, memories, not their own. They saw fire and steel, a war that stretched across the stars. They felt rage, a fury so deep it turned worlds to ash. They saw shadows, not cast by light, but by something far worse, something watching from the void. Kethril fell to his knees, clutching his skull as the visions threatened to shatter his mind. His crew was weeping, screaming, whispering things that made no sense. Through the chaos, a single message cut through the noise, a voice vast and ancient. It was not human, but it spoke with humanity's fury. You were warned, and then silence. The Seeker's Gift reappeared on the edge of conquered space days later, drifting aimlessly. Every member of the crew was alive, but changed. Kethril never spoke again. His once brilliant mind had been hollowed out, leaving behind only an empty, haunted stare. The others told stories that made no sense, rambling nonsense about something waiting in the dark, about human warships being more than machines, about a force that even the Concord feared to name. The Drellic High Council sealed the records. From that day forward, the last race brave enough to seek the truth joined the rest of the galaxy in silent agreement. No species, no matter how intelligent, no matter how advanced, would ever scan a human warship again. Not because they feared humanity, but because they feared what humanity had found. The galaxy fell into a quiet, uneasy acceptance. The truth was never spoken aloud, but it was understood by all. No one scanned a human warship, not the most advanced species, not the most reckless empires, not even the ones who had built their legacies on uncovering the unknown. Yet, in the darkness of the void, there were always those who refused to heed the warnings. The Caesari were one such race. Unlike the Zelnari, who sought to control knowledge, or the Drellic, who sought to understand it, the Caesari were a species of shadows, smugglers, data thieves, and black market warlords. To them, information was currency, and secrets were the most valuable treasure of all. They had heard the legends of Terran warships. They had seen the Concord's silence, the way even the most powerful empires refused to speak of what lurked within those hulking vessels, and that silence only made them want the truth more. In the lawless depths of uncharted space, where no treaties held sway and no fleets patrolled, the Caesari set their trap. A dead system, a faked distress signal, and a stolen cargo hauler rigged to scan anything that approached. It was a simple plan. Lure a human warship close, activate their scanners the moment it arrived, and transmit the data back to a hidden relay station before anyone could stop them. The moment the information was secured, the warlords would sell it to the highest bidder. A Caesari named Creel commanded the operation. He was no fool. He had heard the stories. But he did not believe in ghosts, curses, or anything beyond cold, hard reality. Everyone else was weak, he told his crew. They scanned human ships and panicked, but we will see the truth. The trap was set. The bait was perfect, and the humans came. A single Terran destroyer, the TNS Revenant, emerged from hyperspace in response to the distress signal. It was smaller than the other warships spoken of in hushed whispers. No dreadnought, no monstrous titan of war. But something felt wrong. Even from a distance, Creel sensed it. Something in his bones itched, like a silent alarm going off inside his mind. "Scan it," he ordered, pushing the thought away. His crew hesitated for only a moment before obeying. The scanners flared to life. And then, nothing. No alarms, no screams, no sudden failures. The ship's instruments worked perfectly. Creel exhaled in relief. "See? All nonsense. We have the data. Now we—" Then he saw the readings. There was nothing. No heat signatures, no energy output, no matter displacement. It was not possible. A ship could not exist in real space without registering something. Even cloaked vessels left behind gravitational distortions. Even the most advanced stealth technology could not erase a ship from existence. And yet, according to the scanners, the Revenant was not there. Creel's stomach twisted as a terrible realization crawled up his spine. It had let them scan it. For the first time in galactic history, a human warship had allowed itself to be observed. Not because the Caesari were smarter, not because they had outwitted some unknowable force, because the Revenant wanted them to see. The ship's lights flickered. Not the Revenant's, their own. The hum of the ship's engines stuttered. Creel grabbed the console as the air grew heavy. His lungs struggled to pull in breath, like the atmosphere had thickened into something wrong. The rest of his crew staggered, some collapsing as their bodies trembled violently. The ship was speaking. Not in words, not in code, in memories. Creel's vision twisted. He was no longer on his bridge, no longer aboard his ship. He was elsewhere, a battlefield, a world burned to blackened cinders, a fleet shattered to drifting corpses. And the warships, they were not machines. They never were. Something had been left behind in the aftermath of humanity's greatest war. Something that should have died. Something that had no place in the natural order of things. And yet, it endured. It had been given form, a body of metal, engines, and guns. But at its core, in the very bones of its being, it was not a warship. It was a grave. And something inside had never stopped screaming. Creel collapsed, vomiting as the vision ended. His body felt wrong, like his mind had brushed against something it was never meant to comprehend. He clawed at his console, desperately trying to shut down the transmission, to wipe the data. Too late. The Revenant moved. Not forward. Not back. It flickered. One moment it was before them. The next, inside their ship. The walls bled data. Screens turned to static. Crew members screamed as their eyes turned black, as their bodies locked in place, as their voices failed them. Creel saw the numbers on his console counting down. Data transmission complete. The information had been sent. To where? Creel did not know. He never would. The Revenant spoke one final time, a whisper that was not human. Your debt is paid. Then there was nothing, no ship, no Sisari, no debris, only silence. The message the Sisari had stolen, the data they had fought so hard to uncover, was never found. But across the galaxy, in the depths of forgotten systems, where warships drifted in unmarked graves, some began to wake. The silence that followed the Sisari incident was different. Before, species avoided scanning human warships out of fear. Now they avoided them out of understanding. Something ancient had been disturbed. Something that had never been meant to be seen. For centuries, the galactic conquered had believed itself to be the ruling power of the cosmos. They had mapped the stars, catalogued the species, built empires that stretched across hundreds of systems. But there were things in the void that had never been written in their records, because the ones who tried to record them never returned. The forgotten war. The pieces were scattered, but now some had begun putting them together. Across hidden archives, ancient reports whispered of humanity's great war, a conflict fought not against another empire, but against something else. It had been brief, violent. The humans had fought alone, no species had come to their aid, and then, silence. The war ended. The humans survived. And no one ever spoke of what exactly they had survived against. At first, the conquered had believed humanity had simply won, destroying their enemy so completely that history had erased them. But the truth was so much worse. The whispering ships, something changed in the years following the Sisari's disappearance. Across the stars, Terran warships began moving in ways that defied reason. They appeared in systems with no record of departure. They drifted through battlefields that no longer existed. Some were seen hovering over ancient ruins that had been dead for millennia, their weapons powered but never firing. And then there were the whispers. Reports from cargo pilots, station workers, even criminals in the outer rings all spoke of the same thing. They would be in their ships, minding their business. And then, the static would come. A brief flicker over their comms. A burst of noise through their instruments. Not a distress signal. Not a message. Something else. A voice. Not words, not even thoughts, but a presence. Something watching. Something remembering. Most ignored it. Others panicked, abandoning their ships in terror. But some, the ones who had fought wars, the ones who had killed before, they understood it. It was not a threat. It was a warning, and one by one the oldest warriors of the galaxy began to leave the front lines. They resigned from their fleets, they abandoned their titles, some fled into exile. Not because they feared the humans, but because they feared what the humans had locked away, and what would happen if it ever got out. The Galactic Concord held an emergency session. The evidence was undeniable. The humans had been hiding something from their war, something that should never have been disturbed. But now, the secret had leaked. The Sasari had sent a transmission before they vanished. No one knew where it had gone, but someone, somewhere, had received it. And if they ever opened it... The Concord made their decision. The first sealed order. A command that all members were required to follow, no matter their allegiance, no matter their standing. No species would attempt to scan, track, or research human warships ever again. Any fleet, any scientist, any individual who attempted to uncover the truth would be erased, not by the humans, but by themselves. Because there were things in the dark that even the most powerful empires could not fight, and whatever humanity had buried in their warships was never meant to be woken up. In a forgotten corner of the galaxy, in a nameless station long abandoned by the Conquered, a single console flickered to life. A signal. A transmission that had taken years to arrive. The last remnants of data stolen by the Sasari, now decrypted. On the screen, the message displayed only one thing. Coordinates, and far, far away, in the void where no stars shone. Something opened its eyes. The coordinates led to a place that should not have existed. A sector unmarked on any galactic chart. A void of absolute darkness, where sensors refused to function, where even the most advanced starships experienced unexplained malfunctions. The Conquered had erased all records of this place long ago, but now something had called it back into existence. A lone ship, small and unmarked, drifted towards the coordinates. It did not belong to any official fleet. It bore no insignia, no transponder codes. It had been stolen from a dozen different sources, assembled in the shadows by those who did not fear the warnings. Inside, a single figure watched as the void grew darker. Her name was Vena. She had spent the last decade hunting the truth. The fall of the Sasari, the whispers in the void, the ships that should not exist. It all led here. She was no fool. She knew the legends. The Conquered's first sealed order, the unspoken law of the galaxy. But Vena did not care for fear. She cared for knowledge, and so she followed the trail. As her ship neared the coordinates, her instruments died. The engines faltered. The artificial gravity flickered. The ship refused to move forward. It was as if the void itself had denied her entry. Vena exhaled sharply, reaching for the manual override. Then she saw it. A ship. Number A Grave. It was massive, far larger than the warships spoken of in the legends. A dreadnought the size of a city, but wrong. It drifted with no power, no lights, no movement. Yet Vena could feel it. A cold weight in her mind, pressing against her thoughts like fingernails scraping against bone. She had always believed warships were just machines. This was not a machine. It was a corpse, and something inside it was still awake. Her hands trembled, but she activated the scanners. A single scan. That was all she needed. The readings flooded in, data unlike anything recorded before. The ship was not built by humans. It was built from them. Not just their metals, not just their technology, their very essence. The walls were lined with something organic. The framework pulsed faintly, as if it were breathing. Then the data feed corrupted. The words on the screen twisted into something unreadable, flickering between languages. None of them known. And then a sound, not over the comms, inside her mind, a whisper, ancient and hollow. "You have seen too much." Vena gasped, staggering backward as her vision fractured. She saw flashes, a war long forgotten, ships burning, planets screaming, a terrible mistake, and the thing humanity had created to end it. The first warships, not machines, not tools of destruction. They had been seals, cages for something that had no name. Humanity had not survived their war. They had buried it, locked it away inside these husks of metal and flesh, imprisoned by weapons that were never meant to be unleashed. And now, because of her, because of the Caesari, because of those who refused to listen, one of them had woken up. Vena's breath came in ragged gasps as she stumbled toward the escape pod. Her ship was already dying. The systems were not failing. They were being devoured. Something inside the dreadnought had reached out. It had tasted her presence. And now it was hungry. Vena barely made it to the pod before the hull behind her melted away. Not by fire, not by weapons, but by something that had no shape. She launched herself into the void just as the ship was consumed. Her last sight before the pod's systems kicked in was the dreadnought, once silent, now shifting. Its darkened hull flickered. A glow, a heartbeat. It was waking up, and the void would never be silent again. Vena's escape pod tumbled through the void, spinning wildly, systems barely functional. She struggled to breathe, her mind still echoing with the whispers. The terrible knowledge she was never meant to have. She had done it. She had uncovered humanity's secret, and now the entire galaxy was in danger. Her pod's comms were barely working, but she forced them online. The transmission beacon was weak, but she did not care. She had to warn them. The conquered, the fringe colonies, the humans themselves. She had woken something up, and it would not be satisfied with just her. Fingers shaking, she typed out a simple message, a distress signal that would be picked up by anyone listening. Only 3 words. "It is awake." Then silence. The message spread like wildfire. The conquered scrambled, fleets were mobilized, emergency councils convened, the sealed order had been broken. And humanity? They did not speak. They did not issue a response. They did not deny or confirm. They simply moved. For the first time in centuries, every human warship, every silent, drifting relic, changed course. They converged toward one point, the place Vena had found. And across the galaxy, those who had once feared humanity's war machines now realized the terrible truth. They had never been warships. They had been prison guards. And now, their prisoners were stirring. Vena never made it back to civilization. Her escape pod was found days later, floating lifelessly near the conquered border. No damage, no forced entry. She was simply gone. Only her data logs remained intact, repeating the same message over and over. "It is awake." By then it was already too late, because across the void, in the deepest corners of space, something began to move. The Lost War was not over. It had only been sleeping.